Somewhere in the world today, two groups of people are organized specifically to hurt each other, on purpose, with tools built for exactly that job. It's one of the strangest things your species does. No other animal builds specialized technology, trains for years, and coordinates thousands of individuals for the sole purpose of killing members of its own kind at scale. So where did this actually start? The honest answer is more contested and more revealing than you'd expect. Picture two very different images of your earliest ancestors. One shows small bands of hunter-gatherers, peacefully sharing resources, resolving conflict through talk and social pressure, a species too spread out and too cooperative to bother with organized violence. The other shows exactly the opposite: constant raiding, ambush, and bloodshed between neighboring groups. War as a permanent, ancient feature of human existence, going back deep into prehistory. Both pictures have serious researchers defending them, and for decades, this question has divided anthropology almost completely in half. So which is it? The answer starts with a single grim discovery, buried in the mud of northern Kenya. In 2012, a research team led by paleoanthropologist Marta Mirazón Lahr uncovered something at a site called Nataruk that reshaped this entire debate. Preserved in ancient lakeside sediment were the remains of at least 27 individuals, men, women, and children, dating back roughly 10,000 years. Their skeletons showed catastrophic, deliberate trauma, blunt force wounds to the head, arrow and blade injuries, several individuals with hands apparently bound at the time of death. This wasn't the pattern of scattered accidents or isolated conflict. It looked, unmistakably, like a coordinated attack on an entire group. Hunter-gatherers, not farmers, killed a full 4,000 years before agriculture reached that region. Think about what that timing does to the tidy old assumption that farming, private property, and stored surplus were the necessary ingredients for organized violence. Nataruk predates all of it. Mirazón Lahr's team was careful about the claim they were actually making. A single site, however dramatic, can't prove a universal rule about all hunter-gatherers everywhere. What Nataruk demonstrates is narrower and in some ways more unsettling: that the specific ingredients some researchers assumed were required for organized lethal violence between groups, farming, food storage, fixed territory, formal leadership, weren't strictly necessary after all. A mobile, technologically simple foraging population was capable of this. The question the field has argued over ever since is how often and under what conditions that capability actually got used. This is where researcher Keeley, an archaeologist whose influential work, War Before Civilization, challenged what he called a deeply romanticized view of prehistoric peace, enters the debate directly. Keeley compiled skeletal and archaeological evidence across dozens of pre-state societies worldwide, and argued the data consistently pointed toward high rates of violent death, in some documented forager and tribal societies exceeding the proportional combat losses of 20th century industrial warfare. His conclusion was blunt: the idea of a peaceful prehistoric past wasn't supported by the evidence. It was a comforting story modern societies told about themselves. Keeley pointed specifically to evidence many earlier archaeologists had, in his view, quietly explained away or simply failed to look for. Fortified prehistoric settlements ringed with defensive ditches and palisades, weapon caches clearly designed for use against people rather than game animals, and skeletal collections with trauma patterns that earlier generations of researchers had sometimes attributed to accident, ritual, or animal scavenging, rather than considering warfare as the more direct explanation. Keeley's broader argument was less about any single site, and more about a pattern of interpretation that archaeology as a field had, for cultural and political reasons of its own, been reluctant to see violence where the bones and the ruins were plainly showing it. But here's the twist that keeps this debate genuinely open rather than settled. Anthropologist Douglas Fry has spent years pushing back hard against Keeley's framework, studying contemporary and historically documented nomadic forager societies specifically, the groups whose lifestyle most closely resembles humanity's deepest past. Fry's research draws a sharp distinction between interpersonal violence, one person killing another over a personal dispute, and true war, organized, planned, group versus group lethal conflict with a clear us-against-them structure. When Fry's team examined the ethnographic record closely, they found that among the most nomadic, least materially accumulating forager societies, actual organized warfare was strikingly rare. Most lethal violence in these groups looked personal: revenge killings, disputes over a partner, individual grudges, not coordinated raids between rival bands. Fry's argument isn't that ancient humans were peaceful in some naive, idyllic sense. It's that the specific behavior of organized, group-level war may have required something extra, something beyond simply being human: enough population density, enough resource competition, or enough social complexity to make coordinated group violence worth organizing in the first place. To make this concrete, Fry has pointed to specific, well-documented groups like the Malaysian Batek and various Arctic and subarctic foraging peoples, populations with low density, high mobility, and few defensible stockpiles of anything worth raiding for. In these settings, walking away from a conflict was usually cheaper, in every practical sense, than fighting over it. A rival band could simply be avoided by moving to a different stretch of territory. That option, meaningfully, mostly disappears once people become tied to a fixed location, a stored harvest, or a claimed water source. Exactly the conditions many researchers now see as tipping a population from occasional interpersonal violence towards sustained organized war. So how do you square that against Nataruk, a hunter-gatherer massacre that predates farming entirely? Yeah, this is precisely where the debate lives today, and honestly, still isn't fully resolved. Some researchers argue Nataruk shows organized warfare is genuinely ancient, present even among simple foragers under the right conditions. Others argue the site actually supports Fry's model rather than undermining it, since the region around Nataruk, unusually rich in fish and water resources for a hunter-gatherer landscape, may have created exactly the kind of localized resource competition Fry's framework predicts as a trigger, rather than proving war was a universal, ever-present human behavior. There's a deeper evolutionary thread underneath both sides of this argument, one that predates humans entirely. Primatologist Richard Wrangham has spent decades documenting something disturbing among wild chimpanzees, humanity's closest living relatives: coordinated, lethal raiding parties, groups of adult males quietly patrolling territorial borders, and when they encounter a vulnerable lone chimpanzee from a neighboring community, killing him through calculated, organized violence rather than a heated, spontaneous fight. Wrangham's research suggests this pattern, small coalitions using planned, low-risk violence to expand territory, has deep roots stretching back to a common ancestor humans and chimpanzees shared roughly 6 million years ago. That doesn't settle the human debate, but it reframes it. The capacity for coordinated, calculated violence against outsiders appears to be older than humanity itself. Whether that capacity gets regularly activated into full-scale war seems to depend heavily on circumstance, population pressure, resource scarcity, and social structure, not on some fixed, unchangeable human nature switched permanently to on or off. It's worth noting Wrangham himself has been careful not to treat chimpanzee raiding as a simple, direct blueprint for human warfare. Chimpanzees lack language, formal alliances, and the kind of symbolic group identity, flags, uniforms, shared stories about who we are and who they are, that shapes how humans actually organize and justify collective violence. What the chimpanzee data offers isn't a script humans inherited unchanged. It's evidence that the underlying psychological building blocks, coalition forming, calculated risk-taking against outsiders, opportunistic use of a numbers advantage, didn't have to be invented from scratch by humans at all. They may simply have been inherited, then reshaped almost beyond recognition by everything uniquely human that got layered on top: language, culture, technology, and identity. Think about what this means for how you understand conflict today. War isn't simply an ancient behavior humans have always practiced identically, nor is it a purely modern invention layered onto a naturally peaceful species. It looks more like a capacity, inherited from deep in your evolutionary past, that gets switched on or off depending on the specific pressures a group actually faces: scarcity, density, threat, and the social structures built around managing all three. Somewhere in the world today, two groups of people are organized specifically to hurt each other, on purpose, with tools built for exactly that job. The uncomfortable truth your ancestors' bones seem to be telling you is that this capacity has likely always been sitting somewhere inside your species, waiting on circumstance rather than inevitability. Understanding that difference, capacity versus certainty, might be the single most important thing anyone studying this history could actually tell you.